You walk past them every day. Sometimes you ignore them, other times you may throw them a buck or two. They're America's 600,000 homeless people. To you, their fate may seem both inevitable and divorced from your own, but neither of these assumptions is correct. Solving chronic homelessness in the United States is imminently achievable. Chronic homelessness has been more or less eradicated in places like Salt Lake City and Finland, and can be so in the US if we have the political will and basic humanity. This goal is even more urgent with the rise of the COVID-19 pandemic, which will likely not be going away for at least another year or so, and for which shelter in place is impossible for those without shelter. But the underlying problems, like with all the worst effects of COVID-19, predate the pandemic and have solutions that must remain in place long after it has left us. Today we're going to try and convince you why housing for the homeless should matter to you, not just on moral terms, but on practical ones as well, why it's in your own best interest. In other words, we're going to explain to you when it comes to universal housing and homelessness, why you should care. You may have heard someone say, "Homeless people are all filthy, crazy drug addicts. They need to be cleaned off the streets so I can go about my day." Before we begin, we must, unfortunately, first establish that homeless people are in fact humans, with a basic dignity, and that dehumanizing and treating the unhoused as an infestation is neither moral nor particularly original. Indeed, it's been a primary feature of fascist ideology for decades. Nevertheless, it's very popular in much of American media. From ostensibly local news to Fox News, tabloid outlets spend hours of TV time a day dehumanizing the homeless, speaking about them like vermin or trash that needs to be quote-unquote cleaned or quote-unquote swept away.
Migrant camps, but this is worse than that. It is one big sea of human waste and effluent and rats and filth. And the number of rats there just outweighs the population.
Environmentally friendly cities seem to be the dirtiest, filled with garbage and needles and the scattered debris of homeless encampments. Irony.
Seattle is dying, and it's not some fringe website. This is their major anchor for 15 years, released it. And the problem is the police are not enforcing the laws. They're allowing people to feel threatened. They're allowing garbage everywhere.
And it allows, junkies to run wild, homeless people to run wild. Because as Greg said, no one wants to be the bad dad.
Right.
No one wants to come in and get tough.
Right.
Dismissing the basic humanity of the homeless isn't just vulgar, it's a deliberate tactic to put us on the defensive. When we are debating this basic humanity, we're not discussing how to house, feed, and politically empower the homeless. It's a provocative, offensive posture designed to be as edgy and shocking as possible. We need to move past this and instead reassert the primacy of human beings and how they need to be centered in the conversation about how we quote-unquote deal with the homeless. Not from the perspective of the homeowner or the business owner or the tourist, but from the perspective of those most affected by homelessness, the homeless. Once we do this, we're having a completely different conversation, and one that's long overdue. You may have heard someone follow this up by saying, "Homeless people are lazy and just need to get a job. The government providing housing will disincentivize work." One of the primary objections to housing as a right is the idea that it will somehow delegitimize the hard work you and your loved ones have put in. This is a mentality of artificial zero-sum that incorrectly assumes people only work out of fear of destitution, and that those who don't work do so because of a moral failing. But this is a 19th century puritanical way of looking at it. What's far more useful is looking at what's good for society as a whole. Nobody opposes public education for all because doing so will somehow delegitimize the work you did to afford private school for your children. Nobody opposes public roads because you work 80 hours a week to afford access to a private toll road. Public goods in no way denigrate or delegitimize the hard work you and others have put in. They are a baseline social good that creates general welfare that is good for everyone in the long run. Take, for example, Steve Jobs, who was born into a lower middle class family, but due to the robust public education system and social welfare system of 1960s and 70s California, was able to get a world-class education and a healthy upbringing, and would later go on to create one of the most valuable companies in the world. Think of all the staggering 2.5 million children who experience homelessness throughout the year in the United States, who will get no such opportunity because they do not have the most basic foundation of human flourishing. Now, their value as humans, of course, is not at all tethered to their ability or inability to create a $1 trillion tech company. But the point is, even using the most Darwinian and capitalist logic possible, providing general human welfare in the long run is better for everyone. And worrying about people getting a handout when you work hard is a textbook way the rich drive a wedge between the working class, often with the racial context. Don't fall for this scam. If you work hard and see someone get a quote-unquote handout, don't get mad at them because you think they got it too easy. Ask yourself why you were forced to work so hard in the first place for basic human needs. Getting upset that some people may get housing makes just as much sense as being outraged someone got free schooling or got to drive on a public highway. People going without schooling or driving down a dirt road doesn't make you any happier or any richer. Just the same, people sleeping outside and freezing to death doesn't improve your status in life at all. Indeed, it diminishes all of society. You may have had someone follow this response by saying, "We can't afford it. Surely housing the homeless will bankrupt us." This is a common objection, and one that also requires us to think much bigger. The thing about deficit concerns is they're mostly selective and ideologically motivated. But even accepting the premise of deficit concerns, this isn't true. According to the National Alliance to End Homelessness, a nonpartisan research group, quote, "A chronologically homeless person costs the state on average $35,578 a year. Costs on average are reduced by 49.5% when they are placed in supportive housing. Supportive housing costs on average $12,800, making the net savings roughly $4,800 per year." Why is that? It's because, quote, "Without stable housing, the homeless cycle in and out of emergency departments, inpatient hospital stays, psychiatric centers, detoxification programs, and jails, resulting in high public cost and poor health outcomes for individuals, including premature death." To a great extent, we already house the homeless. It's just called putting them in jail and prison, and it's far crueler and far more expensive than housing them in the first place. One Miami Herald analysis of public records over a 6-month period in 2018 found that homeless people accounted for over 2/3 of the prosecution for lifestyle crimes in the city of Miami Beach, e.g. public intoxication, sleeping, urinating, all things when done inside a home no one thinks twice about.
When you think about basically the basic functions that you do in your daily life, right? You go to sleep, you shower, you go to the bathroom several times a day, you sit at your kitchen table, all of those things you do in the privacy of your own home. When you don't have a home, you have no choice but to do those things on the street. And of course, the big fallacy is that there's plenty of shelter beds for people, there's plenty of places for people to go to stay. We know that in almost every city in America, that's not the case. And that's certainly true in rural America. And so that activity has to take place somewhere, and it takes places on the corner, in a parking lot, in a public park, by a public library, any place where anyone can go and find a place to basically put down a tent.
But even if you don't care about budgets or the basic humanity of homeless people, studies show providing affordable and free housing reduces crime. In fact, it is one of the most efficient forms of crime prevention we have. Not only does housing the homeless prevent petty and expensive fake crime, it correlates with the reduction of what we would consider real crime. Instead of using massive amounts of resources to police, arrest, charge, try, convict, and incarcerate, a process that can cost north of $1 million for a single person in some instances, this whole budget item can be avoided by simply giving people a home. If cost were really the issue, our current system of spending millions of dollars arresting, trying, and locking up poor people, rather than housing them and providing them with preventive drug treatment and mental health care, would be the last system we would create. But it's the one we have, because it's the one we've always had. And as a culture, for decades if not centuries, our first instinct is to police, arrest, and imprison our way out of problems. But there's another vision, one that seems radical but is actually extremely achievable and very practical. Solving 100% of homelessness is impossible, but with enough funding, accountability, and infrastructure, we can get very close. The plans are in place. More than enough wealth exists. What's missing is courage. What's missing is political will. And this will not exist without your support, which is the most important and urgent reason why you should care.